Whoa. Like, you can't really see how many people there are from the first row, but now that I see you guys all, whoa, that's slightly scary. But nevertheless, I'm going to talk about how to test an ecosystem today. And I assure you, I am a very boring person. So I don't want to bust any stereotypes about government bureaucrats. But I am an information system architect at the Estonian Information System Authority. Which means I don't do testing every day. However, I do design system. I do design software systems that have to be testable, that people end up living with and ends up supporting a country. And that means I need to think about somehow about testing and whether the stuff I do design is effectively testable. So today, basically, 4 key things I'm going to talk about. Firstly, why do we talk about an ecosystem at all, and what is an ecosystem, and what do I mean by that? Then, how do we test it? Or how do we attempt to test it? What are the practical things that we do? And of course, as with anything, there's a ton of challenges. It's a brave new world for us, so I'm going to cover those. And finally, a few key points that sort of should really sort of stick with you. But first, some context. So, our agency is responsible for designing the infrastructure that runs Estonian digital government. We don't actually provide the services ourselves. We provide the platform on top of which other agencies provide those digital services. And that kind of means that the entire Estonian digital ecosystem or digital government is resting somehow on top of our platform, which is kind of a big deal. Thing is that contrary to most countries, in Estonia, the government is the information system. For example, if there's a particular service that goes down, the public government gazette, I've been told by the lawyers that if that service goes down, there effectively is no law in Estonia, because legally you can't tell whether some act is legal or not, because that server contains or that service contains all the sort of law in Estonia, all the regulations. So it is really, really sort of tricky, and no, they don't always listen. Meaning that we are the architects, we are the providers of the platform. But as in any democratic country, we don't have much leverage over other agencies. So it is quite a challenge to have people design sensible systems and make sure that they are tested properly, for example. And the following is very much work in progress. If you notice, there's a API first government kind of statement in the title slide. And this is what we're trying to do, but we've been trying to do that for the past few months only. Well, we've kind of been doing that actually for ages already, but it's the first time we have formulated it in a sort of coherent fashion. And the awesome or scary, depends on how you look at it, thing about our role is that nobody's really attempting to do these sorts of things in the government sector. In the private sector, there's a lot of organizations that think like that and run systems of our scale, but not in the public sector. And we make things up as we go. Just that slide basically is about telling you that this is not the ultimate truth. This is not. I'm not going to sort of preach you that if you do these things, then everything's going to be awesome. No, it's about the journey. We have just started it. We have taken some steps, and I'm going to share the learnings with you. So, why do we speak about an ecosystem? Why is that important at all? Because control over the ecosystem is actually what you are after. Nowadays, it used to be that you could have your company or country or whatever and happily live in isolation because everything is nicely self-contained and, well, there was no complexity involved. nowadays we all operate in an ecosystem of different services connected by the APIs. We provide a service to somebody. That somebody consumes our service and somebody else's service, providing a third service to somebody else, who in turn provides a service to us. It's an connected system. And as in any ecosystem, there's evolutionary pressure. People try to sort of climb the ladder up the food chain, right? Instead of carbon, data flows in that ecosystem. And unless you're really careful about how you treat that ecosystem, two things might happen. A, the ecosystem might wither and die, which is a really bad thing if you're a part of it. Or you get just pushed down in the food chain because somebody else is climbing up. So it's really important to understand what your place in that ecosystem is and sort of be able to sort of maintain that. In the best case, you're able to somehow direct and to drive and control that ecosystem in a fashion that is suitable to your goals. But everybody benefits from a healthy ecosystem. And just testing one side of an API is, yeah. Well, let's say one of our government services, that has an API. We test it, we launch it, and it's perfect. It's just brilliant. It just works perfectly. All the functional tests run through, all the unit tests run through, the code is beautiful, it's tested to the perfection. With only a small, tiny little thing, it's built on a specific technology. It requires, and that, I know it's not a necessarily good idea, but it does happen sometimes, is that it requires a .NET sort of SDK kind of thing to actually operate properly. And your partners don't like .NET or Java or Python or whatever you have there. And next thing you know, the partner developers are going to speak their client out of actually using your API altogether, and you have a perfectly functional and perfectly useless piece of code on your hands. This is the stuff that I'm talking about. And it does happen. It does happen a lot. And nowadays, you don't control the most moving parts anyway. Have you heard about the padding library with Node? Yeah, well, some nods and some smiles. And there was this guy who got horribly offended. Horribly, but I don't even know by what. But the guy basically decided to pull his library that provided this immensely useful function of padding strings. Awesome, because that's not what you learn in Programming 101. But nevertheless, there was a library providing padding. And he decided to pull that library. And apparently that killed half of the ecosystem because everything depended on that library, depending on other things that depended on that library. And the entire thing came crashing down. Well, welcome to the modern world. I happily see that there's going to be a speech tomorrow about testing in a complex world. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You don't know what's going on inside your set of libraries. You don't control the operating system. You just don't, unless you're Google or Facebook. But for mere mortals, that's the case. You have so many moving parts, interdependent moving parts in your systems, that you are actually better off testing it as a sort of ecosystem rather than just looking at your own code. Again, your code running perfectly on the developer's box is rather useless if it doesn't operate well in the configuration in your cloud provider in conjunction with the libraries that are there, the specific versions and the IP stack that's there. You need to look at it as a system. And vendor lock-in is a really bad thing, even if you are the vendor. Even if you manage to somehow sort of convince yourself that I'm the center of the universe, and everything revolves around me, and I don't really need to care about anything that goes on around me, which is how it used to be in the software world. Well, guess what? It's a bad thing. All of a sudden, everybody depends on you, and people don't like that. People go somewhere else. They don't like big sort of scary things they depend on. And this is why open standards were invented, to foster collaboration, to build ecosystems. So, well, and basically flexible systems are more resilient. So you don't want to be that vendor which everybody else locks into. It feels good at first, but it really isn't. And so, because of all of those things, we focus on making that Estonian ecosystem work. Our goal is to have a bunch of happy customers happily doing their digital government stuff in Estonia. And that involves making the customer happy, the end user, the citizen, the e-resident. Also, by the way, from 2018, making everybody in Europe happy, because there's going to be cross-use of all the digital identification methods in Europe. But to do that, we need agencies that provide services on top of our platform. Because we don't provide the services, we provide the platform. We need integrators bringing those services together. We need other countries actually to collaborate with us. We need actually developers, because in Estonia we don't actually, the government usually doesn't hire developers. We need outside contractors to actually build those services for us. We need the entire ecosystem to work in order for that vision to happen. That the customers can happily go about their digital lives without having much thought about why the hell the government does the things they do. And I speak about the digital government like it's a big, big important thing, and it is. But an average citizen has just 2.6, was it? Yeah, 2.6 contacts with the government per year, per annum. So it's not something that you interact with every day. So you want those 2.6 contacts to be seamless, to be of high quality. And this is what we try to do. And this is why we speak about the ecosystem. This is why we try to make the entire ecosystem work. Because just making that one piece of software, be it XRole or ID card or whatever work, that's just not sufficient. So how do we do it? The approach is rooted in system safety. It's a very interesting concept. Look it up. It's not very well known outside of the certain geek circles, but it's a very interesting concept, which in turn is rooted in the U.S. Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Program in the 50s, from the 50s and 60s. It turned out that, contrary to what I was told at school, when Americans built the first ballistic missiles able to carry nuclear weapons, they were really, 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 really concerned about blowing the world up accidentally. I was told the other way around, but that's just my personal history. And they needed to figure out a way how to test those things and how to make those things that could bring about the apocalypse. How do you make these things safe and well tested and high quality, and so that they actually don't do those things they are actually designed to do accidentally? And they developed, a lot of very smart people developed a very neat set of theory around how do you make these things happen, because it's not only about the physical, the missile, it's also about the warhead, it's about people handling those warheads, it's the launch controls, it's the radars. It's a very complex system that needs to work in unison and work well for things not to blow up. And so there's a lot of good books written about it. There's a long theory around these things, and our approach to testing and software quality and the system in general is actually rooted there. And we seek to test so we don't break the ecosystem. A perfectly dysfunctional set of perfectly functioning software is not very useful. A good example is XRole. Just don't want to go into that much detail, but it's basically, think of it as Skype for organizations. Skype is for people talking to each other. XRole is basically the same thing for organizations to be able to talk to each other. And we might take the XRole server, because we build it, we procure it from our partners, and test it, and it works brilliantly. It does everything it was supposed to be doing, and it doesn't crash, and it's all fine. And we hand it out to the organizations, and they deploy it. And now it turns out, for some reason, 2 of those boxes are not able to talk to each other, or they're not able to talk to each other over different versions. And that means that the entire ecosystem, the XRole, breaks down. The organizations are not able to talk to each other. The Estonian digital government breaks down, although we delivered high-quality software. And this is a increasingly complex problem, because we have hundreds of security servers out there, a huge zoo of different platforms, providing a massive amount of different services, lots of messaging going back and forth, and none of that is under our direct control. Therefore, we need to make sure the entire ecosystem is well tested. For example, if we mess up the documentation for the XRole, even if it's vague, if it's unclear, this can lead easily to developers implementing the services incorrectly. We provide them a piece of software they don't know how to use, or they misinterpret configuration keys or something like that. And the entire ecosystem breaks down because communication doesn't happen. Developers don't like XRole, so they don't implement it, so we get decline in users, we get a decline in services, and so forth. What we try to do is we try to embrace criticism and failure. And for most of you, this is like, yeah, so, well, but this is government we are talking about. Government, by definition, is infallible. Government has all the answers, provides everything, and doesn't ever fail. Yeah, well, some chuckles around. Yeah, well, but that's how it's supposed to be. That's how for ages the government or the king or whatever, the ruler, is the infallible thing that stems from higher powers and is just there. Well, guess what? In the software world, things doesn't work like that. And this is why we try to actively sort of embrace criticism and failure. And the emphasis on trying too, because that doesn't always happen. You test to fail, not to succeed. Having a confirmation that all your tests are green, well, that's a concern for me actually. Because that means that magically, somehow, in our very complex system, the developer somehow developed or delivered a piece of code that is just perfect. That just doesn't happen. That something must be wrong there. Do I have enough tests? Is everything fine? Am I running the right version? Right. So what we're trying to do is we try to engage stakeholders early. Get those developers on board. Get those developers actually talking to us. Get those partners talking to us. Try to pilot things. Try to do alpha testing. Try to introduce eating our own dog food into the governmental organizations, which is a very sort of controversial thing. For example, we supply the digital signature software. And now we have a situation where we would love to do sort of pre-beta testing, internal testing of the digital signature software in our organizations. Yet we know that if that software fails, our organization will grind to a halt in terms of those progress. And in government, the progress is really important. So how do we overcome that? How do we convince people to actually still use the beta version of our software? How do you get that going? But we try to. We try to focus on more system boundaries and APIs. Try to sort of separate the system into clearly cut pieces over well-defined interfaces, and then focus on testing those interfaces. Whether that interface behavior is in accordance with what is specified, what is required. And this is the part that actually we've been doing for ages. XRole does exactly that. I'm an information system architect, and from my sort of bird's eye view, I don't see what goes on within the Tax and Customs Board or what goes on within, let's say, Ministry of Education. Because all I see is an XRole interface, and behind that, it's their responsibility. They design it. They might do their things on Oracle, or they might do their things on Ruby, or they might test them or not test them. All I know is that there's an API that either functions or doesn't. And in that sense, XRole has been doing these, or following this principle of focusing on the API and implementing separation of concerns for ages. But now we're trying to extend it beyond just sort of simple government provided services, and try to integrate it into the government cloud, the digital signature infrastructure, the channels layer, and so on and so forth. And again, the reasoning for that is that we can now sort of chop the complex system up into more manageable pieces, and we can have a sort of an understanding as to where do we have those hooks in the wall, where do you have the assurance points. We have found that documentation is good, but code is better. SDKs, standard implementations, and so forth are really, really, really helpful. If you want to have a ecosystem you want to run. So when you provide an API, and we do to a very large extent, then don't provide just the documentation of how to use the API. Provide an SDK. And among other things, this provides you with very simple assurance. If your SDK fails, probably some other implementations fail as well, and so you have your sort of your testing routine built right into your development cycle. And this is again really sort of challenging for a big bureaucracy, because the SDKs don't do that much. They don't provide end user value. If our agency spends X thousand euros on building a SDK, it provides zero immediate value for the citizen. Zero. This is a bad thing in the government. Everything must provide taxpayer value. But, you still need to sort of have the discipline to actually build these things. So, key challenges. And to emphasize, this is a mind shift kind of thing. And this is a thing that you need to sort of have in your organization if you want to shift your mind from just testing your piece of software and being content with that to consciously being part of a larger ecosystem and trying to test that and make sure this ecosystem is healthy. And it's a mind shift. It's not a technical challenge because all the tools are there. There's an awesome, I've been following these sorts of tool chains for 20 years now, and compared to what was then and what is now, you can have awesome API testing and automated test generation and fuzzing and all sorts of testing tools. It's not a technology challenge at all. It's all there technology-wise. But it's a massive challenge to change the mindset. You don't know what's good for the customer. You simply don't. We provide an XRole security server, and we claim that, well, this is how it's supposed to be. We know that for any organization, running an XRole security server as an endpoint, an entry point to the XRole network, that's how it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to be. Well, do we? Do we really? It has served us marvelously, but let's say you have a Tesla car. The car knows perfectly well where you went. And it's a company car, and so you need to sort of declare your taxes because it's sort of private use versus corporate use kind of thing. And, well, the customer asks rightly the question, so if the car knows exactly where I've been and how much energy was spent doing that and how much that energy cost, why doesn't the car declare my taxes for me? Why not? And now we ask a question, so do we install the security server, which is a piece of Java code, into a Tesla? Well, not really. I'm very confident in the technology, but I'm not that confident. Actually, it's not the technology, it's our ability to convince Tesla to do these things. So we don't know about these scenarios. We don't know what's best for the customer, simply because the variety is too large. And the ecosystem is too complex for us to comprehend. And therefore, we can't test from the user's perspective because we don't know how they end up using our software or how they end up using our platform. And this requires a very important shift in our attitude, meaning that we need to stop sort of talking to people how they're supposed to be doing things and start listening. So how exactly are you using our API? So we have this awesome platform. How are you using it? Does it work? What tools do you use? What concerns do you have? And again, it's a this is the ICT week we have every spring, and this means we get a lot of visitors, and we get a lot of people coming in and saying, "You do awesome stuff over here. Estonian digital government is just brilliant," and this puts you in a really sort of difficult spot to say, "Hey, I don't know things," because you get conflicting signals. And that's a challenge. You are as bad a monopoly as anybody else. Yes, you are. Feels very good to be the monopoly provider of software and everything and running the ecosystem and being the center of the universe. But guess what? It happens to everybody. If you don't think of the ecosystem while building your software or APIs, why would you even test? Because everybody's used to, like, we're the information system agency. We have a law that says that you need to use our software. Why do we test it? Everybody's forced to use our stuff anyway. Right? Well, no. Because yes, they are forced to use the software and everything sort of like, there's leverage there. But by taking that attitude, we would break the ecosystem, and that would result in bad service for the customers, for the citizens. So we need to move away from the monopolistic thinking and start sort of really embracing the openness and sort of thinking of the ecosystem rather than providing the key software. Standards are good. Software is better. Lawyers, I've understood, especially in the public sector, but also architects, they live in this because they don't influence anything directly. If I'm sitting in my office, I don't have any direct control with direct contact with any developers. I sort of counted those layers, and I ended up with the flow that I talk to people who talk to people who talk to people who do procurement, who build software. And there's possibly 2 other layers in between. So I don't have any control over anything. So what am I to do? If I want to influence the reality, what do? I write the regulation. I open up Word and I start typing, and there's a regulation. And because that's all I can do, I might make an assumption that by writing things down, the world changes. The reality changes. Well, it doesn't. Writing something down has very little effect. I assure you, I've tried this. Just writing something down has a surprisingly small effect on how the world functions. We need to provide tools, we need to provide validators, automated test scenario. And again, these things do not actually do anything for the end user. They're just things that we need to build in order to support the ecosystem. And this is something that we are starting to do. So, a summary. We really need to figure out how to test our ecosystem in a meaningful way. And this is a much more complex challenge than would seem. Because testing is measuring quality. Quality assurance, QA stands for quality assurance. Therefore, you need to be able to measure that quality, which means you need to be able to define that quality. So what is the quality of a country. This is a good country, or this is slightly worse country. Our country is 0.1% better today than it was yesterday. How do you do that? And it's actually a very important question. And this is pretty much why I'm doing this keynote, is this slide. It is really, really important to understand why you are testing your software. For us, it is the understanding that the ecosystem needs to function in order for Estonian state to be there. For you, it might be something else. Some people test because if you don't test, things break and risks materialize and you lose money. Some people test because they take pride in their software and they don't deliver crap. Some people test in production, like Facebook. And has it really worked that badly for them? No. It works very well because they have a very clear strategic understanding as to where quality assurance lives within their strategy. They have a very clear understanding why and how they test. And you need to have that understanding as well in order to really effectively test your software. Because, again, you can't test everything. You need to understand what is for you the quality of the ecosystem. How do you assess the quality of the ecosystem in your context? It might be that you measure the number of transactions in your ecosystem. And by the way, ecosystems tend to go sort of exponential. So it might be that you don't do anything with your software, but your number of requests just explodes exponentially. We had the same thing with XRole. We didn't, for quite a few years, we deployed it and it didn't really take off because it's a kind of a feedback thing. There is no need to be on XRole unless others are on the XRole, and chicken and egg kind of thing. And then without that much changes in the software, we didn't change the software that much, the number of messages exploded and is currently growing exponentially. So how do you test that ecosystem before that sort of exponential growth happens? How do you make sure that this exponential growth is actually going to happen? It's really important questions. Work with systems, not software. Testing software is awesome. But nowadays, software is but part of especially your software, is just part of a larger constellation of things. Your user might be in a noisy environment. They might be using a homegrown North Korean piece of operating system. I don't know. You don't know. You need to take that into account. We had a case recently where people wanted to replace, we have this pension card that basically tells people that if you own that card, it grants you access to certain services because you are old and you might be entitled to some benefits. Right? So people went and, we have this ID card thing. Can we replace that pension card with ID card? Why not? And so let's have this ID card, and if you want to have the service, you enter the ID card into card reader and punch in your PIN code, and off you go. The bus driver or the museum or whatever executes a query against a social security database over XRole, gets a response back. Everything's hunky-dory. Well, no. Because have you taken a bus from, let's say, Varsty to Tartu, which is a remote place out there in the woods, in December, let's say 6 p.m. It's really dark. It's cold, it's damp, and you want to go home. Not a lot of people wear glasses, but I used to. And elderly people tend to. What happens with your glasses if you step from a cold, damp environment into a warm one? They mist up. So there you are with your ID card in a effectively dark bus trying to enter the card with your mittens into a card reader and punch in your PIN code. Well, that ain't gonna work. And so we need to figure out a different solution. And that is exactly the approach I'm talking about. Because from the software perspective, there's absolutely no need to design anything. From the systems perspective, considering all the elements, all the card readers and the hardware and the user and the environment and all the partners and the security and also all those things, it's really important to think of the system. We need to change the approach. Software is but a part of the bigger picture nowadays. It used to be that software was this thing that was serviced by sort of well-trained personnel, sort of in this remote corner of the organization. And it was well contained and it was very nice and tidy and perforated cards and so forth. But those times are long gone. Software flows and data flows through our lives seamlessly. And testing, software design needs to accommodate that change. Very simple. Be ready to let go. This is very much a cultural, value-based thing. Admitting you no longer control certain things is a key to reaping the benefits of the ecosystem. You don't control all the elements. You just don't. And if you don't admit that and still attempt to, it's going to be very, 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 very expensive and ultimately futile. We had a case a few years ago when Apple came out with the Yosemite operating system. And Apple is not very known for being very open and transparent in their development. And it turned out that, and we learned about this fairly late, that they changed fundamentally the way chip cards, the cards that like the Estonia ID card, work on their operating system. The entire sort of stack was changed. All the APIs changed, everything changed. And so, now there we are in the middle of in between actually release cycles. Just getting ready for the next release, getting an understanding that, hey, guess what, your architecture ain't going to work on Macs. Yes, we can take the approach that we go and talk to Apple and try to build relationships and get our people into the developers program and get this information early on. And yes, we do. But there's absolutely no way we can change Apple's mind about those architecture changes. And yes, we might try to be very prudent about our library use, but at some point there is going to be a library that does padding somewhere in our systems, and that library is going to go wrong. And there's absolutely nothing we can do about that. And accepting those facts is a key to reaping the benefits from the ecosystem. Because you don't control, you are not in charge. You just flow with the rest of the things. There's a really good example of one of my favorite books about control and how illusory it is. Imagine you have a glass and your hand is on the tap and you fill your glass with water. Right? Happens every day. Who's in control of that system? Who controls the situation? Gravity? Well, that's not a person really. It might be. Sorry. No, don't want to offend any religious kind of. But because you are the only one there, people usually make the assumption that, well, I control. My hand is on the sort of tap. I control the situation. But what's actually happening is that water flows in your glass. The level of glass goes through your eyes to your brain, and your brain controls the hand on the tap, which, by the way, controls the flow of the water. Which, there is no reason to believe that any point of that cycle is somehow more important than others. Accepting these sorts of things, that approach, is the key to understanding your place in the ecosystem and testing accordingly and building the systems accordingly. And it's a really difficult thing, especially for a government person to do. Which is the end of the slides, apparently. I guess this is now the good time for questions. Because I believe, do we have time? Awesome.
It works. So Harles here and myself, we are like the good cop and the bad cop. Harles is the bad cop because he has a gun.
Where?
Hopefully not here. And together we are QA. That means question assurance, as every year. And questions, please. Remember, he has a gun. Yeah.
You said you were documenting your services, which is obviously what I understand, which is a legal requirement, I think, and to make it more useful. But you also said that better standards are good, but software is better. So is that just for practices inside of the team, or does it also apply for some parts of the documentation?
It applies to it. Sort of software augments or supports documentation. A good example is from the open data field, where usually open data is in the government sector done in a way that somebody just uploads a file somewhere, and that's the end of it. But we are learning actually from, and when you're learning from Eurostat, then it's serious. What Eurostat is doing is, in addition to making their data publicly available, they also provide an R package that you can just directly utilize and say, hey, I want to connect to Eurostat dataset, I want to get dataset XYZ, and I want to get sort of those summaries out of that. So in effect, you instead of documenting your dataset and its structure and what the delimiters are and what the record structure is, you can supply a piece of software that implements all of that. Makes use very simple and very easy. And software is easier to document than file formats and APIs, for example. And this is what we're trying to do. Meaning that, yes, there's an API description, but there also should be an SDK or sample code that actually executes and executes those API queries and sort of implements that documentation. Well, by far not there yet. Most of Estonian APIs are well documented, but there's a thing that you can, I guess it's true in any bureaucracy, you can establish sort of quality requirements, and you can establish a requirement that has to be a document, but it's really difficult to mandate or require that document be useful. So, yes, we have APIs, those are documented, but documentation is not necessarily useful. Therefore, we try to support that with code, which is always useful. Well, most of the times, because I don't use Windows. But, well, yeah.
More questions?
Hi. I am curious. I understand that you're working in a kind of Agile Scrum way. And from a tester's point of perspective, where's your entry point? Like, do you have access to the stakeholders, to the users? Can you influence what you develop? Or is it more still a document passed down from the top?
There is... I apologize if anything I said indicated that we are doing any Agile or Scrum in any serious manner. We don't. Just, that's... Right. We don't claim to. We try to adopt some of the practices, but we are not nowhere close. It is really hard to influence the end user and understand what the drive is. We're trying to open up more. Again, from the XRole, we are running sort of community events for the XRole users, where they can sort of express what their needs are and sort of tell us and actually talk to each other, because it's an ecosystem thing. What the needs might be and where the XRole might go from the user's perspective. So we provide a platform for that collaboration and try to get input, but and we drive the technology roadmap. But to a very large extent, we're doing what the customer or the environment requires from us.
Okay, thanks.
More questions? Yeah.
So how do you define quality?
Very carefully is the answer. We are currently moving very slowly and very cautiously in that direction, because it is a difficult question. But it used to be that quality in our organization was defined through whether or not the software passes acceptance tests. You do procurement, and then you get a piece of software, and the quality software is what gets accepted. Now we're extending that to, okay, so in addition to the software being accepted, is it also useful? Does it sort of go through pilot testing? So we define quality as something that actually passes pilot. And the next step is to define the quality as software that actually is sort of accepted by the pilot organizations, so that not only they use it, but they also should like that. So we are very slowly changing the definition of what quality means. It used to be that quality is just being able to deliver. Now it's being able to deliver and be sort of pass through the pilot phase, and we are moving further. Again, there's nothing exact about these things, and this is why we take small steps, see whether that measure of quality is correct, and then we take further steps. And it is a good question. I don't have a straight answer.
I have a sort of a related question.
Sure.
Quality related. So I was just thinking that has there been any politician that has had to step down because of quality issues or delivery issues in software? And I recalled one instance in Estonia in 2009. I believe the Minister of Social Affairs had to step down because some support money payouts were delayed because of a delivery problem in a software project. But any other incidents around the world that were actually it has trickled up to the highest level of the government?
Not that far.
Even Obamacare didn't make it?
Well, Obama is still there for a while. No, usually it doesn't work like that. Yesterday a colleague from Denmark actually told us that they had a massive fiasco to the tune of billions of euros in terms of software. It was not necessarily even a quality issue. It was project management failures and so forth. And now the public is starting to realize that this software thing is really important for the government. But this leads to, apparently in Denmark, it leads to a situation where people don't back off from software. This is complicated, this can go wrong, and this can escalate to higher levels, so why don't do it? And this is a really sort of concerning sort of tendency. But it indicates how the bureaucrat thinks about things. Usually they don't sort of undertake stuff that ends up costing that could end up costing somebody their job. Therefore they don't, and so therefore it doesn't sort of bubble up. But yeah, it has happened in Estonia once. Possibly should happen more often.
More questions? She was first.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. I have two questions, if I can. So first one, I truly believe it's very tough to work in government organizations. But I have a question. Do you have a room for innovation or something that you can prototype and suggest to government to go forward?
Definitely. there's always room for innovation and prototyping, because it's always in a mindset. In a governmental setting, it's really easy to take the stance that the law defines what I'm supposed to do, and if I'm doing anything other than what I'm supposed to do, I'm breaking the law, therefore I'm not doing that. And if you take it very seriously, you can take that approach. But if you even try to sort of slightly think about the law slightly differently, and think about your mandate slightly in a slightly wider context, innovation becomes easy. There is definitely room, and it's a mindset issue rather than anything inherent to the government. And I've seen big organizations from the inside. It's not that different. It's very easy in a big corporate also to fall into the trap that there's a regulation, there's a process, and I'm going to follow that, and I can't innovate. No, well, that's in your head. What's your second question?
The other question. If you had any kind of like failure with releases, how are you mitigating this? Are you able to release hotfix in a couple of hours, days, or how is happening in your ecosystem?
Yes, it has happened. We have just recently rolled back a release from the central government portal. We have also backed down on certain decisions on the XRole, because it turned out that something that a feature that actually added security, and again this is where we need where the not knowing what the customer needs are comes to play. We thought that the customer required a high level of security, so we implemented sort of and required both in software and in regulation a fairly sort of high level of certain security features. It turned out that for the ecosystem that's too high. The bar was slightly too high, so we backed down on the decision, and turned out that we could do that without compromising much security, because the security personnel from the partner said that actually we are fine with that risk level. So we backed down on our decision because of the ecosystem, and you can see that as actually a failure to roll out things, to actually rolling back on decisions, and I think happens all the time. All we can do is we can be flexible, we can listen. We don't always, but we try to. And so this is how we mitigate. And always you should be able to roll back fast, because you don't know what's going to happen in the ecosystem.
There was a question here, right?
You mentioned something about embrace criticism and failure. You test to fail, not to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a bit wrong statement, because I think you test to get feedback. What's your opinion about that?
Feedback in a government sector is a really sort of is very curious. And again, we get this conflict, because again, yesterday there was a delegation from Netherlands that came in and said, "You do awesome stuff. Your digital government is awesome." Not a day. You might get quiet days, but let's say not a week goes by I don't get tagged on Facebook because somebody thinks Estonian digital government is just awful. And they attempted to do some magical thing that would be outrageously not unthinkable in any other country. And that took them 2 attempts rather than 1. And they go like, "Andres, go and fix it." That's feedback. How much of that is useful and what can we do with it? That's a different story. Also, as it was said earlier, in government sector, ministries can back down, and there's a lot of political responsibility in the end. So that attitude to feedback is really, really sort of, we don't really want that. So feedback is really tricky in the government sector. One other thing, by the way, is that we don't know who the customer is, because our services are defined or designed to be usable for the entire society, from children to the elderly, then exactly who your customer is and who do you ask for feedback? It's a really, really tough question to answer. We go out, we ask questions, we build community events, we try to talk to developers, but feedback in the public sector is really, really difficult to make happen. If I answered your question.
You have one more?
Because later on you say you want to improve, so I think feedback is necessary.
Oh, absolutely.
To improve.
Absolutely.
So therefore, I think it's contradicting now at this moment. And by the way, I'm from the Netherlands.
Oh, yeah. Hello. Well, we are trying to reach out. We are trying to get the feedback. But it is difficult because people don't want to give feedback, and if they give feedback, it's really difficult to tell whether they're not happy with the government in general, or the weather was just bad, or they're giving genuine feedback. And from the other hand, for the government, because any feedback or any sort of acceptance of criticism means accepting that you have done something incorrectly, for a government official, admitting that you have wasted taxpayer money, it's really difficult. So there are two sort of difficult points there. But you are absolutely right. Feedback is crucial for getting better.
Andres, let's give you a round of feedback. All Estonians sitting here, I mean, and probably all of you are exposed to the Estonian e-government systems in one way or another. Everybody raise their hands who has an ID card and is using any of the government system. Very good. So keep the hands up. Yep. Keep them up. Keep them up. Very good. So all of you who think that the government is doing a good enough job with keeping these systems going and having them on a good enough quality from your perspective, keep the hands up. Everybody else, you can let them down. There you go. You got your feedback. Thank you. You can let the hands down. I mean, I'll tell you, Andres, this is a tough crowd. They're testers. I mean, just being close to them means that things will start to crash. For instance, yesterday when I came in for lunch, when I entered the building, my watch crashed. So, from smartwatch to stupid watch. Thank you again, Andres. We have a little token of appreciation for your hard work and lovely speech. Thank you.
Thank you.